Well, greetings from Athens, from Greece. I'm Rania Lampou. I'm a STEM teacher, global educator, global peace ambassador, researcher, international keynote speaker, and author. I'm working at the Greek Ministry of Education and Greek Astronomy Space Company. And I would like to warmly thank the Inspiration Channel for giving this opportunity to conduct today this new session or webinar. So, greetings everyone. Thank you all for attending this webinar on a pressing issue that continues to shape our digital age, digital harassment, the evolving face of gender-based violence in the era of social media. This will be our topic today. Because we live in a world where technology is deeply embedded in every aspect of our lives, and while the internet and social media offer us an incredible opportunity for communication, connection, and empowerment, they also come with new and significant challenges. Among these, the rise of digital harassment is one of the most insidious, particularly for women, non-binary individuals in marginalized communities. And social media platforms, once hailed as tools for freedom of expression and community building, now have increasingly become spaces where harassment, abuse, and gender-based violence flourish. Harassment has been used to occur primarily in physical spaces, but now it has shifted to online environments where perpetrators can attack anonymously, relentlessly, and with global reach. So this shift has made it harder to escape, harder to ignore, in many cases harder to prosecute. What does this mean for gender-based violence? It means that the forms of violence that disproportionately target women and gender minorities are not only continuing but evolving. What is particularly alarming is how these forms of digital harassment often mirror and reinforce offline gender inequalities. Just as women have historically been silenced in the public sphere, they are now being driven off online platforms, subjected to threats, and undermined in their efforts to have a voice in both personal and professional domains. But this issue is not just about individuals directly targeted by harassment. It's about the broader implications for our society. How do we address the normalization of gender-based violence online? How do we hold social media platforms accountable for protecting the users? And most importantly, how do we create digital spaces that are safe, equitable, and empowered for everyone? So today's presentation will explore these questions, focusing on the evolution of gender-based violence in the digital age, the role of social media platforms, the gaps in legal protections, and how we can collectively work towards solution. We will also highlight the incredible resilience and resistance of those who continue to advocate for safer, more inclusive online environments despite facing relentless harassment. I think now it's a time to share my presentation. I think it's visible now. Digital harassment encompasses a spectrum of harmful behaviors, and this could include hate speech, trolling, cyber stalking, to more severe acts such as doxing, and other online harassment behaviors. So, what are the nature and forms of digital harassment? Cyber stalking, what is this? It's about persistent and unwanted tracking or monitoring of someone's online activity, often with intent to intimidate or cause fear. For example, repeatedly messaging someone or monitoring their online presence, or hacking accounts to surveil their digital interactions. Secondly, online sexual harassment. This has to do with unwanted sexual comments, requests, or content sent through social media or messaging apps. So sending unsolicited sexual messages or images, what we call sometimes cyber flashing, sexually explicit comments or posts, or inappropriate advances in direct messages. Trolling and hate speech. This is very common nowadays, or when we target individuals with inflammatory, derogatory, or harmful messages, often to provoke, to intimidate, or silence them. So in this case, we use sexist, racist, or homophobic language to insult them, or degrade individuals or groups, particularly targeting women or gender minorities for their opinions or public presence. And doxing is when we publicly reveal private information, such as home address, phone numbers, or personal details without consent, often to incite harassment or threats. So when we publish someone's these personal details, this means that we encourage physical online harassment, and of course, actually, usually this targets women activists, journalists, or public figures. Non-consensual sharing or of intimate images. When we share or threaten to share private, intimate photos or videos without consent, this is very serious. And the body shaming also, and image-based abuse, when we criticize, we insult, or humiliate someone based on their physical appearance, often in a gendered way. We comment negatively on someone's body size or shape or attractiveness. Another form of digital harassment has to do with impersonation or catfishing, when we create fake profiles to impersonate someone or we deceive others for malicious purposes, such as obtaining private information or embarrassing the victim. And threats of physical, sexual, or sexual violence, when we send explicit threats or harm, including rape or assault or murder through social media platforms. Gaslighting and emotional manipulation. What is gaslighting? This has to do with psychological manipulation, and this aims at making victims doubt their own reality, often used to undermine victims of online harassment. Group attacks and pile-on harassment, so coordinated efforts by groups to overwhelm a target with hate messages or insults or threats, often organized through online forums or group chats. What we call, for example, dog pilling or brigading, where multiple users flood the victim's social media with hateful or abusive content, target them for expressing opinions or holding certain identities. Gender misinformation, when we spread false information that specifically targets someone based on their gender. And exclusion and silencing, systematic exclusion or targeting of women and gender minorities to force them out of online spaces. Online shaming, and what we call cancel culture, publicly means that we shame or cancel someone. Often we disproportionately target women or gender minorities for perceived social or moral infractions. When we publicly criticize or harness someone for their opinions or actions, especially when gender norms are violated. So, cyber stalking, here we want to understand how this differs from traditional stalking. This happens primarily through digital platforms such as social media, now emails, messaging apps, online forums. Traditional stalking involves physical presence. And cyber stalkers use tools like fake profiles or geolocation tracking, hacking, monitoring social media activity, which allows them to observe and harass victims from a distance without ever being physically near them. Anonymity, accessibility. Anonymity is a key feature of cyber stalking, as stalkers can hide their identity behind fake accounts or pseudonyms. There's persistence and reach because cyber stalking can happen anytime, because stalkers are not bound by physical proximity or time. So the digital nature allows constant access to the victim, even across borders, making it harder to escape. And public exposure in cyber stalking often involves public aspects like spreading false information, posting private content, or defaming a victim online in front of an audience. So this exposure can actually damage the victim's reputation, relationships, and professional life. Psychological impact of forcing, while both forms of stalking are psychologically distressing, cyber stalking can create a pervasive sense of vulnerability. The victim is often unsure who is watching or how the personal information is being used, leading to constant anxiety, especially since the internet feels unescapable. So why these forms of digital harassment becoming growing problem for women, especially marginalized women online? Because of increased reliance on digital spaces, this is what's happening nowadays. We, as more of social professional lives focused and move online, the opportunities for cyberstalking to harass and control the victims have expanded. Anonymity enables, of course, abusers. There is a disproportionate targeting of women and marginalized genders. That would be women, particularly women of color or LGBTQ individuals. Other marginalized genders are disproportionately targeted for cyberstalking due to systemic biases or misogyny or cultural norms that make their presence online more susceptible to harassment. Intimate partner cyberstalking. Lack of adequate legal frameworks and enforcement, that's a big issue. Many legal systems are not fully equipped to handle the nuances of cyberstalking. And the global nature of cyberstalking complicates legal actions since stalkers can be in different countries, making it harder to investigate or enforce laws or seek protection across borders. The digital tools for manipulation, surveillance, stalkers can easily use accessible technology such as GPS location trackers, spyware, and hacking tools to stack their to spy their victims. And of course, this technology gives these people a greater reach and more intimate access to victims' lives, more than traditional stalkers might ever achieve. Exploitation of social media, of course, and privacy weaknesses, and public shaming, cyberbullying, which are extensions of this phenomenon. So, the unique characteristics of the digital world, we could say, constant connectivity, difficulty in tracing abusers, and global reach have made these digital forms of digital harassment a more pervasive and psychologically damaging form of gender-based violence. Of course, solutions require both legal form and stronger responses from technology companies to protect the users. So in what ways do non-consensual sharing, for example, of intimate images and doxing target women worldwide? First of all, this happens due to existing societal gender norms, power dynamics, and the specific ways in which women and marginalized genders are treated in both online and offline spaces. So how these forms of abuse impact women more severely? First, gender power dynamics and control. Women are often subjected to what we call male gaze and objectification, and intimate images become a means for abusers to reclaim control, to shaming and silencing women by making their private life public. Secondly, sexualization. Society tends to hypersexualize and objectify women more than ever. And this leads to significant stigma, of course, and victim blaming, where women are shamed for the existence of intimate photos rather than focusing on the wrongdoing of the perpetrator who shared them. So the blame shifts to women for being reckless or irresponsible, compounding the emotional and social damage they experience. Cultural and social norms around female sexuality. Women's sexuality is more heavily policed and scrutinized than men's in many cultures. So as a result, the public exposure of the private intimate images tends to elicit a far more intense and negative reaction. And in some societies, this exposure can lead to extreme social consequences such as physical violence, for example, or ostracization. Men, by contrast, often face far less social backlash for similar actions, as male sexual expression is normalized or even celebrated in many cultures where female sexuality is stigmatized. Another issue has to do with online harassment, gender-based violence. When women, for example, intimate images or personal details are shared, they frequently become targets of coordinated online harassment campaigns, which can include threats of physical or sexual violence, hate speech, and trolling. And of course, victim blaming and reputational harm. This subject women to intense scrutiny and judgment, damaging their personal and professional reputations. Threats to physical safety, it's always there, and disproportionate targeting of marginalized women, emotional and psychological impact, emotional toll on women who experience non-consensual sharing of intimate images or doxing is profound. Many report feelings of shame, embarrassment, anxiety, and depression. So some victims experience post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of the violation and the relentless harassment that often follows. So women's online safety becomes deeply compromised, and the psychological impact of knowing that personal information of images are being circulated without control can lead to withdrawal from online spaces or social isolation. Impact of women's advocacy and activism. Women activists, particularly those who fight for women's rights or other social justice causes, are often targeted with these threats as a way to silence them. And these attacks are strategic, aiming to undermine the credibility, to shame them publicly, discourage them from continuing their advocacy. Legal policy gaps is the main issue, that legal systems in many countries have been slow to respond to the rise of this phenomenon, leaving women without adequate recourse. And even when laws exist, women often face challenges in navigating the legal system, and the trauma of going through public legal battles can deter many from seeking justice. This slow response of law enforcement and social media platforms, of course, exacerbates the problem, leaving women vulnerable to prolonged harassment. Now, what is the psychological and social impact? What are the mental health consequences of experiencing digital harassment, particularly for women and gender minorities? Anxiety and fear, definitely. This is a constant threat perception. This full day and night connectivity of the internet means the abuse can feel inescapable, with victims feeling hypervigilant about their online activity. Victims often report fear for their physical safety, and this constant sense of danger can result in chronic anxiety, impacting daily functioning. Depression is a feeling of hopelessness, deep feelings of worthlessness, social isolation, and loneliness. This is especially common for gender minorities and marginalized groups who rely on online communities for social support, but face relentless harassment in these spaces. Post-traumatic disorder, especially for those who are subjected to severe forms of harassment, and what we call re-triggering events, mean unlike some forms of trauma that might have a clear endpoint, online harassment can persist for extended periods or reoccur with the same intensity, leading to what we call re-traumatization. The ability for harassers to continually resurface or escalate their abuse makes recovery difficult. Body image and self-esteem issues. Digital harassment often targets women's appearance and bodies, contributing to body image issues, eroding self-esteem. Sometimes it can lead to eating disorders or self-harm because women are becoming hypercritical of their looks, leading to long-term damage to self-worth. Social withdrawal, isolation, before, so fear of engagement. Some women are forced to withdraw from social media platforms and online communities, which can cut them off their professional opportunities or social connections at activism spaces. And the experience of social isolation is worsened by the feeling that online spaces are unsafe, leading victims to avoid not just the platforms where harassment occurs, but also interactions in real life due to fear that the abuse may spill over into the offline world. Shame and embarrassment, this public exposure increases the emotional damage, because victims know that they are being judged by potentially global audience, and stigmatizations, of course, goes along with this. The cultural stigma attached to sexuality or gender nonconformity can exacerbate feelings of shame, self-blame, and guilt. Many victims of digital harassment experience self-blame, feeling that they somehow caused or contributed to the harassment. And this burden of guilt often leads victims to withdraw from seeking help or reporting the abuse, prolonging this way the cycle of trauma and harm. Depersonalization and attachment. Victims of sustained digital harassment may experience depersonalization, which is a psychological response where they feel disconnected from their own sense of identity or emotions. This is a coping mechanism in response to overwhelming stress, making victims feel as if they're watching their life from the outside or going through the emotions without really feeling present. Suicidal ideation, self-harm in extreme cases, also this can lead to suicide, usually for victims who feel unable to escape the abuse or who are subjected to relentless threats, body shaming, or public humiliation. These victims may develop thoughts of self-harm or consider suicide as a way to escape the psychological pain. And studies have shown also a correlation between cyberbullying and suicidal behavior. This is very common studies. Another issue has to do with the cognitive impairment and decreased functionality, so impaired concentration, difficulty in focusing, loss of productivity, inability to concentrate, whether in school, at work, or in everyday tasks. So this leads to mental exhaustion, which can impair cognitive functioning, sleep disorders, insomnia, nightmares, or difficulty sleeping, especially if these victims are receiving threats or facing harassment late into the night. And the impact on professional and personal life, of course, is evident. Career damage, personal relationship leads to strained connections, isolation, and loss of trust. Definitely broken trust and what we call hypervigilance. Victims may develop a hypervigilant attitude, constantly monitoring their online presence, second guessing their posts, or feeling anxious about sharing personal information. So this constant self-monitoring can extend to offline interactions as well, leading to feelings of paranoia and fear. So we have seen here that the mental health consequences of digital harassment for women are profound and multifaceted. The constant nature of online abuse combined with societal stigmatization and the lack of adequate support can lead to long-term mental health challenges such as anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress, and even suicidal ideation. Addressing these issues requires not only stronger protections and policies from social media platforms, but also a broader societal shift in how we view and how we respond to online harassment, especially when it disproportionately targets vulnerable groups. Now, how does the constant threat of online harassment affect the public participation of women in social, political, and professional spheres? Self-censorship, reduced expression because there's a fear of targeting. There is what we call selective participation. Many women limit their participation in online discussions platforms altogether to avoid harassment. And this affects women in male-dominated fields or those who take a public stance on social justice issues. Withdrawal from public life and activism. They leave the public sphere, what we call silencing effect. Online harassment functions as a tool of silencing, discouraging women from participating in political debates or running for public office. There's damage to professional reputation, of course, career disruption, limited online presence, emotional toll, and mental health impacts, so burnout and tiredness, impact on decision making, barriers to political participation, censorship of political opinions, and definitely reduced participation in digital spaces, limiting social media engagement, and loss of digital citizenship, because for many women, online platforms, serve as spaces for community building, for professional networking and social activism. Harassment forces them to leave or restrict the participation, leading to a loss of digital citizenship and voice. Undermining women in leadership roles. So increased scrutiny for women leaders, professional discrediting. Harassment can include character assassination, spreading false rumors, or revealing private details to discredit women in power. And this affects their ability to lead effectively as they face distractions and reputational damage that male leaders may not encounter to the same extent. Economic impact and financial costs, the cost of security, missed opportunities, impact on gender equality and representation. This has to do with skewed public discourse, widening, of course, the gender gap, and this impacts policy making, media coverage, and societal progress on gender equality. Normalization of gender-based harassment, so cultural impact. Normalization of online harassment creates a hostile culture that discourages women from challenging the status quo or speaking out on sensitive topics like gender violence, sexism, or inequality. The cumulative effect of this harassment can deter other women from entering public spheres, reinforcing patriarchal norms or restricting gender equality progress. And this, of course, deters younger generation, young women who actually may be dissuaded from pursuing careers in politics or activism or public speaking. So we explained the mental health consequences and, of course, the long-term psychological effects. For example, cyberbullying, again, anxiety, depression, self-esteem, body image issues, loss of trust, academic professional impact, public shame, humiliation, cognitive impairments, concentration issues. How does the fear of online abuse impact women's use of social media? We mentioned about self-censorship, the impact of activism, social cultural silencing, and the impact of mental health and demand for platform accountability. A fear of abuse leads women to call for stricter regulation of online platforms. They demand better moderation, reporting systems, and clear consequences for perpetrators of online harassment. This entails digital literacy and support. Women are increasingly aware of the importance of digital self-defense, such as using privacy settings, blocking features, or seeking support from communities that offer solidarity in the face of abuse. Now, how does media platforms contribute to perpetuating power imbalances between genders through harassment? We could say with this inadequate moderation enforcement or weak and consistent moderation, many social media platforms struggle with consistently enforcing rules against harassment, hate speech, and abusive behavior. But harassment reports often go unresolved or are dismissed, particularly when it comes to gender-based violence. So this failure to act signals to abusers that their actions have no real consequences, empower them to continue targeting women. Bias in reporting systems. Reporting systems on many platforms are not user-friendly and can be biased. Often they do not take into account the gender nature of harassment. Women, especially those in marginalized communities, frequently report that their complaints of misogynist abuse are not taken seriously or are handled with less urgency than other forms of abuse. Automation over human moderation. This means that many platforms rely heavily on algorithms and automated systems to monitor content. However, the systems are not always equipped to understand content or detect nuanced forms of gender abuse, like tone policing, sexting, slurs, and microaggression. So all this results in a gap in protection for women while abusive content continues to proliferate. Design choices that facilitate abuse through anonymity and pseudonymity, the lack of accountability emboldens trolls, especially in gender harassment campaigns. Amplification of hate speech. Social media algorithms often prioritize engagement, which means controversial or inflammatory content gets more visibility. Misogynistic content, harassment, or abusive language can go viral quickly because of the way these platforms prioritize clicks or shares and comments. So women who speak out on contentious issues are especially vulnerable to this amplification of hate and harassment in direct messages. Many platforms allow users to send direct messages to anyone, making it difficult for women to avoid unwanted advances, threats, or abuse. A normalization of misogynist culture has to do with hostile online cultures, with toxic language, by encouraging call out and shaming culture. Social media can facilitate and also they can reinforce targeted abuse campaigns where groups of people pile on and shame women who express strong opinions or challenge societal norms. So this affects especially women, particularly those who are involved in activism or public life. So all these aspects, victim blaming, of course, social media platforms sometimes perpetuate the idea that women are responsible for the abuse they receive, especially if they are visible or outspoken. Limited mental health support. This is a factor. The absence of resources like counseling, trauma-informed response systems, or dedicated support systems exacerbates the power dynamics as victims are left to cope on their own, while abusers remain largely unaffected. Platform profit model and gender harassment. This means that social media platforms are driven by profit. We all know about this, and their business models prioritize engagement over user safety. So this means that controversial or inflammatory content gets more attention, driving higher engagement metrics. So because this type of content generates revenue through clicks and ads, platforms may be less motivated to aggressively clamp down on abusive behavior or directly perpetuating the harassment of women. Intersectional vulnerabilities, women from marginalized communities, or targeted doxing, as we say, in cyber stalking, and how our algorithm content moderation policies failing to address these issues. We mentioned about the algorithm, context of blindness in algorithm, ability to recognize nuance, and failure to identify coded language, and flexibility in detecting tone, bias in trained data, prioritization of neutrality over protection, and automation versus human moderation, when there is over-reliance on automation and limited human oversight. Inconsistent reactive policy enforcement. We have inconsistent application of rules, moderation which is reactive rather than proactive, and lack of contextual review in policy enforcement. Profit-driven model discourages aggressive moderation, but as I said before, priority of engagement over safety, fear of over-moderation, limited accountability, transparency, so lack of consequences for abusers. And what role anonymity play in enabling gender-based violence? You can understand that this actually shielding users from accountability. There is lack of consequences. There is a need of evading bans. It encourages definitely abusive behavior. There is escalation of aggression, facilitates organized gender-based harassment through coordinated attacks, trolling, anonymity culture, exploits anonymity for sexual harassment, so cyber flashing and unsolicited content. Anonymity is often exploited by perpetrators of sexual harassment, such as sending unsolicited explicit images or cyber flashing via direct messages or apps. And anonymity makes it easier for individuals to send sexualized content without fear of being traced, further contributing to the unsafe and hostile environment many women experience online. Undermining victim report and support, so difficulty in identifying perpetrators, lack of accountability mechanism, exacerbating intersectional harassment, positive role for limitation in certain cases. Yes, with some cases, anonymity can protect women. In what ways do the design and functionality of social media platforms facilitate the spread of online use through open comment systems, lack of effective moderation tools, push public profiles, limited privacy controls, direct messages, and anonymous pseudonym accounts. Intersectionality and online violence. it's very important to know what is the concept is, what is intersectionality. This concept focuses on how different aspects of a person's identity, that be gender or race or ethnicity or sexuality, intersect to create unique experiences of discrimination and marginalization. For example, this means that women of color, for example, or LGBT individuals and people from marginalized ethnic backgrounds face harassment not only because of their gender, but because of their racial or sexual identities. So, how does digital harassment affect marginalized gender minorities? Through all this, as mentioned before, psychological, emotional impact, social, economic consequences, intersectionality, and compounded abuse. What are specific challenges faced by women activists and journalists in non-Western countries? If we talk about online harassment, this has to do with cultural and social norms. Sometimes there are family, also community repercussions. Women activists and journalists who face online harassment often endure additional pressure from their families and communities. So the harassment they receive can lead to social ostracization, forced marriages, or physical punishment as families and communities seek to restore honor, as we say. So this social pressure makes it even more difficult for these women to speak out or continue their work. Repressive political regimes. This includes state-sponsored trolls and disinformation campaigns. In countries with repressive governments, women activists and journalists may be targeted by state-sponsored trolls or disinformation campaigns aimed at discrediting their work. So these coordinated attacks often include defamation, doctor images, and the spread of false information to intimidate, humiliate, and silence them. Threat of arrest, also legal action, and of course, what happens with legal policy responses, effectiveness of existing legal frameworks. I would say that already some regional national laws, but we need more strong legal frameworks. There are gaps, lack of specificity. There are jurisdictional challenges. Enforcement laws. So this has to do with limited resources, delayed responses, underreporting, inconsistent policies, inadequate content moderation, lack of support for victims, limited awareness, high legal costs, inconsistent protections. So we need to create the national standards for digital harassment, define what is digital harassment, what is a human rights framework. We need more global frameworks on human rights, more gender-specific focus, promote multilateral agreements, cross-border cooperation, more treaties, more international laws. For example, the Budapest Convention on Cybercrime is a great agreement, but needs to be expanded to include more strong provisions on gender-based digital harassment. We need to hold online platforms accountable globally if it's possible, so more transparency reporting, fines for no compliance. And of course, it will be precise international codes of conduct for the companies that need to be followed and respected. Develop the national legal mechanism for victim protection, so cross-border restraining orders with the national safe reporting mechanism, global digital harassment victims fund, and ensure privacy data protection through data sharing protocols, encryption policies, develop technology-driven solutions at the national level that could be digital fingerprint for harassers or AI machine learning for moderation. Of course, education, the national awareness, everything starts from education for law enforcement, empowerment civil society organization, international public awareness campaigns, and what legal recourse to victims of digital harassment, how criminal prosecutions, this has to do with how we need to comply with the national laws. And the last part of the presentation has to do with, especially with education, and what is the role of social media companies regulating, preventing online harassment, what they can do. They can use more preventative tools and features, more transparency, accountability measures. Their of society and culture is important. Now they need to set community guidelines in terms of service. They need to moderate also the content. The measures already being used are not safe. We need stronger measures because there is a failure to address structural issues. There is inconsistent enforcement. You don't know exact the scale of harassment. And here, don't forget the concept of rape culture extends to digital spaces, and this normalizes online harassment, unfortunately. So there is normalization and minimization of sexual harassment. This enforces hyper-masculine and male-dominated subcultures. There is a lack of consequences for perpetrators and sexual objectification and dehumanization that I mentioned before about women. So what role do societal attitudes and norms play in enabling gender-based violence online? Patriarchal gender norms, power dynamics, of course, gender stereotypes, this cultural silence around online gender-based violence, the lack of accountability. All these stereotypes are propagated on social media. They spread misogynistic messages, echo chambers, algorithms, toxic beauty standards, and social comparison, reinforcement of traditional gender stereotypes and hostile online subcultures. How can we challenge the victim blaming culture? Through education, through holding social media platforms accountable, challenging gender stereotypes and misogyny, through prevention and education, through empowering and supporting victims, through enforcing legal and policy reforms. And what are the best practices for educating young people? Through stronger, comprehensive digital literacy education, gender equality and inclusivity should be explained and should be promoted early in the life of young people. More direct engagement learning methods, integrate discussions on gender-based violence, encourage women to speak up, not to be afraid, because this culture of silence, women are afraid to speak up. It's not easy to unlock women and young girls to share their experiences and their feelings. Promote positive online communities, role models, engage families and communities, possible many key stakeholders, and how can public awareness can be more effective by the use of personal stories, more personal narratives, involve key influencers or public figures. They can use humor creative message to engage audience. They can provide clear actions that can target specific groups and communities. What role schools, university, workplace can have in this education, digital citizenship, addressing the issue of cyberbullying, creating more safe, supportive environment, engage discussions. Workplace, of course, establish clear policies about against digital harassment, promote by standard intervention, accountability, provide support and resources for victims, promote collaboration between institutions, ongoing education and support, strengthen communication and reporting. And how can men and male allies play an active role? By challenging toxic masculinity, harmful norms, by mentoring, role modeling, supporting victims, creating a culture of empathy, building solidarity across gender lines, and support the development of safety tools and digital literacy. So we could say that so there is an issue here. By concluding, I want to say finally that this is a serious issue that we need to take into consideration. I want to emphasize that gender-based violence in digital spaces is not just a woman's issue. It's not just a cyber issue. It's a human rights issue. The evolution of harassment in the age of social media calls for an urgent action from governments, tech companies, civil society, and each one of us as individuals. So by addressing it hands-on, we can begin to build online worlds that actually reflect the principles of respect, equality, and justice. Of course, artificial intelligence can help us with new technology, with sentiment analysis, with real-time interventions, automated responses, with content moderation. And in the future, of course, we will see new forms of digital harassment we actually align with immersive technologies, VR or AR, augmented reality, with personal avatars. Maybe there will be a lack of regulation on safety features, but certainly these future challenges need to be taken into consideration. And this means that we need to build more, strongly said before, and safer legal frameworks and frameworks to focus on data privacy and more, safety. So thank you, Hanselo, for your attention, and I hope that this the message of our discussion today, of our webinar, will be spread worldwide in order to protect women and gender minorities in all countries all around the world. So thank you very much.